Snow fell heavy on the empty streets as Sarah collapsed against the brick wall, her swollen belly the only thing keeping her upright. For 3 days, she had knocked on doors, begged at restaurants, pleaded with strangers. The answer was always the same. No room, no help, no hope. Her baby kicked weakly inside her, as hungry as she was. This was how it would end, she thought, alone in an alley behind Murphy's garage. Then she heard the rumble of a Harley-Davidson cutting through the winter silence. Jake Reaper Morrison pulled up, his leather jacket bearing the Hells Angels patch that made decent folks cross the street. He was everything polite society feared: rough hands, cold eyes, a reputation that preceded him like thunder. But when he saw her there, something shifted in his weathered face. Could the most unlikely savior become her greatest blessing? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 3 months ago, Sarah Mitchell had been planning nursery colors in her suburban home, arguing with her husband Marcus about whether sage green or buttercream yellow would be better for their first child. She had run her fingers over fabric samples at the home goods store, imagining her baby's first smile, first steps, first words. The wedding ring on her finger had felt solid then, a promise made real in gold and diamonds. Now that same ring cut into her swollen finger, the only valuable thing she owned besides the life growing inside her. She twisted it absently as she walked the streets of downtown, her belly heavy and low, the baby due any day now. The December wind cut through her thin coat, the one she had grabbed when Marcus threw her belongings onto the porch 3 weeks ago. "I never wanted this," he had said, his face twisted with disgust as he looked at her rounded form. "I never signed up to be a father. Find somewhere else to go." The door had slammed, locks had turned, and 23 years of knowing Marcus Coleman had dissolved into nothing. The first week, she had slept in her car until it was repossessed. The second week, she had tried the shelter, but they were full, had been full for months. The waiting list stretched longer than her pregnancy. Friends from her old life had grown uncomfortable with her desperation, their help drying up as quickly as their patience. Family lived too far away, and pride had kept her from calling them until her phone was disconnected for non-payment. For 3 days now, she had walked, door to door, restaurant to restaurant, church to church. The story was always the same. She would explain her situation, her due date, her need for just a warm place to sit and maybe something to eat. People would look at her with varying degrees of sympathy and suspicion. A pregnant woman alone meant complications they did not want to handle. The diner on 5th Street had let her sit for an hour before asking her to leave. The Catholic Church had given her a sandwich and the phone number for social services, who had told her the same thing as the shelter. "Full up, try again next month." The convenience store clerk had watched her like she might steal something, his hand hovering near the phone. Now, as darkness settled over the city and the temperature dropped, Sarah felt her strength finally giving out. Her feet, swollen and aching in shoes that no longer fit properly, could not carry her another block. The baby had been quiet all day, too quiet, and she wondered if hunger was affecting them both more than she wanted to admit. She leaned against the brick wall behind Murphy's garage, the rough surface catching on her coat. The alley smelled of motor oil and old snow, but it was sheltered from the wind. Her legs gave out, and she slid down the wall until she was sitting on the cold concrete. The baby shifted inside her, a small movement that brought tears to her eyes. This was not how she had imagined bringing her child into the world. Not in an alley, not alone, not with nothing to offer but empty hands and an empty stomach. She pressed her palms against her belly and whispered an apology to the life inside her. The life that deserved so much more than this moment, this place, this failure of a mother who could not even find them shelter. Jake Morrison's hands moved with practiced precision across the engine block, his custom wrench set arranged in perfect order on the workbench beside him. Each tool had its place, earned through 15 years of honest work at Murphy's garage. The Chevy's transmission had been giving the owner trouble for weeks, but Jake could diagnose problems that would stump mechanics half his age. The garage was his sanctuary, filled with the familiar sounds of compressed air hissing, metal on metal, and the low hum of fluorescent lights. Oil stains on the concrete floor told stories of countless repairs, and the smell of motor oil and steel had become as comforting to him as incense in a church. This was where he made sense, where his reputation meant skilled hands and reliable work rather than the fear that followed him on the streets. Murphy O'Malley shuffled through the bay doors, his Irish accent still thick after 40 years in America. "How's she looking, Reaper?" Jake wiped his hands on a shop rag, the nickname rolling off Murphy's tongue without the edge it carried elsewhere. Here, it was just what the old man had always called him, ever since Jake had shown up 8 years ago looking for work, with nothing but a military discharge and a criminal record that made most employers slam doors in his face. "Transmission's shot," Jake said, his voice gravelly from years of cigarettes he had quit but still craved. "Needs a full rebuild. Tell Henderson it'll be ready Friday." Murphy nodded, trusting Jake's assessment without question. The old Irishman had taken a chance on him when no one else would, seeing something beneath the leather jacket and gang patches that others missed. Jake had repaid that faith with loyalty and the kind of work ethic the military had beaten into him in places whose names he could not legally mention. The apartment above the garage was Jake's entire world outside of his motorcycle club. Sparse and clean, it held only what he needed. A bed, a chair, a table, a small television. The refrigerator contained beer, leftover takeout, and little else. No pictures on the walls, no personal touches that might suggest permanence or hope for something more than just getting through each day. His evening ritual never varied. Close the garage at 6, walk upstairs, shower off the day's work, eat something from whatever restaurant had delivered, then fire up the Harley for a ride through the city. The bike was a 1998 Fat Boy, modified with his own hands, its engine tuned to perfection. Riding cleared his head, reminded him why he had survived Afghanistan when so many others had not. The Hells Angels patches on his jacket told a different story than the one Murphy's customers saw. To them, he was Jake the mechanic, reliable and skilled. To the world beyond these walls, he was Reaper, a man whose reputation had been earned through violence and maintained through fear. The contradiction lived inside him like a splinter he could never quite remove. Tonight felt different, though he could not say why. As he locked up the garage and headed for his bike, something in the air seemed charged, expectant. Snow was falling harder now, and the streets were empty except for the occasional car pushing through the growing drifts. He kicked the Harley to life, its rumble echoing off the brick walls of the alley. The sound always made him feel powerful, in control, like the scared kid from Detroit who had joined the army to escape his neighborhood was just a story someone else had told him. The bike pulled away from the garage, its headlight cutting through the snow, carrying him into a night that would change everything he thought he knew about himself. Jake rounded the corner into the alley behind Murphy's garage and saw her immediately. A woman slumped against the brick wall, her dark hair falling across her face, one hand pressed protectively over a belly that was unmistakably pregnant. Even in the dim light from the street lamp, he could see she was in trouble. He killed the engine and swung off the bike, his military training kicking in before his brain could catch up. 8 years in special forces had taught him to assess situations quickly, and this one was bad. The woman was unconscious or close to it, her breathing shallow, her skin pale beneath the falling snow that had begun to collect on her shoulders. "Hey," he said, kneeling beside her. "Hey, can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and afraid. When she saw him, saw the patches on his jacket, fear sharpened her gaze. She tried to push herself further back against the wall, but she was too weak to move far. "Don't," she whispered. "Please don't hurt me." Jake felt something twist in his chest. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the small medical kit he always carried, a habit from his army days that had never left him. "I'm not going to hurt you. You need help." He opened a kit and pulled out a small flashlight, checking her pupils for signs of concussion or drug use. They were responsive but dilated with fear and exhaustion. He could see no obvious injuries, but her pulse was fast and weak when he checked her wrist. "When did you last eat?" he asked. "I don't know," she said, her voice barely audible. 2 days, maybe 3. Jake felt his jaw tighten. Pregnant and starving in December. Whatever story had brought her to his alley, it was worse than anything he wanted to imagine. He checked her pulse again, timing it against his watch. Fast but steady. The baby was moving. He could see the small shifts in her belly, which was a good sign. "What's your name?" he asked, keeping his voice gentle. "Sarah." "Sarah, I'm Jake. You can't stay out here. It's too cold, and you need food and medical attention." She looked at him again, taking in the leather jacket, the patches, the scarred hands that held the medical supplies. "You're Hell's Angels," she said. "Yeah. Why are you helping me?" It was a fair question, one he could not answer because he did not know himself. Something about seeing her there, protecting her unborn child, even while she was dying, had reached a part of him he thought was long dead. Maybe it was the way she had not asked for money or drugs, just sat there accepting whatever fate had in store. Maybe it was how young she looked or how alone. "Because you need help," he said finally. He stood and looked down at her, making a decision that went against every survival instinct he had developed over 42 years of life. Taking in strays was not something Jake Morrison did. Getting involved in other people's problems was how you ended up dead or in prison. But Sarah was not someone else's problem anymore. "Can you walk?" he asked. She nodded, though he could see the effort it took for her to get to her feet. He steadied her with one arm, feeling how thin she was beneath the coat, how her body was giving everything to the baby and leaving nothing for herself. "I live upstairs," he said, nodding toward the garage. "You can stay there tonight. Get warm, get some food." "I don't have any money," she said. "Did I ask for money?" She looked at him for a long moment, this pregnant woman and this dangerous man, both of them understanding that whatever happened next would change everything. Sarah woke to the smell of coffee and bacon, sounds that seemed to come from another lifetime. For a moment she could not remember where she was. The bed was narrow but clean, the blankets heavy and warm. Weak winter sunlight filtered through a small window, and she could hear the distant sounds of tools and machinery from somewhere below. Then it came back to her. The alley, the man with the Hell's Angels patches, Jake. She sat up slowly, her body protesting every movement. The baby was active this morning, rolling and stretching inside her, and for the first time in days, Sarah felt a flutter of hope. She was alive. Her baby was alive. They had made it through the night. The room was small and sparse, furnished with only the bed, a dresser, and a single chair. No pictures on the walls. No personal touches except for a stack of motorcycle magazines on the dresser and a military-style footlocker at the foot of the bed. Through the thin walls, she could hear Jake moving around in what she assumed was the kitchen. When she stood, her legs felt shaky but stronger than they had in days. The clothes she had been wearing were folded neatly on the chair, cleaned somehow while she slept. In their place, she found an oversized flannel shirt and sweatpants that would fit around her belly. The bathroom was as Spartan as the bedroom, but the hot water worked, and there were clean towels. Sarah caught sight of herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back. Her face was gaunt, her eyes hollow, her hair stringy and unwashed. She looked like what she was, a woman who had been living on the streets. When she emerged from the bathroom, Jake was standing in the kitchen, his back to her. Without the leather jacket, he looked different. Smaller somehow, though he was still a big man. He wore a plain white t-shirt that revealed arms covered in tattoos and scars, and when he turned toward her, she could see the thin chain around his neck that disappeared beneath the shirt. "How do you feel?" he asked, his voice rough but not unkind. "Better," she said, though it felt inadequate to describe the relief of being warm and clean and safe. He nodded toward the small table where a plate sat waiting. Scrambled eggs, bacon, toast, and a glass of orange juice. "More food than she had seen in a week. Eat," he said. "All of it." Sarah sat down and took a bite of the eggs. They were perfect, fluffy, and seasoned just right. She had to force herself to eat slowly, her body wanting to devour everything at once. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. Jake poured himself a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter. He was quiet for so long that Sarah began to think he would not answer. "My little sister was pregnant once," he said finally. "Boyfriend took off when he found out. She was too proud to ask for help, too scared to tell anyone how bad things had gotten." Sarah stopped eating. "What happened to her?" "She died. Both of them. In a shelter in Detroit, middle of winter. Pneumonia." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with old grief and regret. Sarah understood now. This was not charity. This was penance. "I'm sorry," she said. Jake shrugged, but she could see the pain in his eyes, carefully hidden behind years of practice. "Eat your breakfast," he said. "Doctor's appointment is at 10. I don't have insurance. Murphy knows a guy. Don't worry about it." Sarah took another bite, tasting salt from tears she had not realized were falling. For the first time in months, someone was taking care of her. Someone was making sure she and her baby would be safe. The doctor's appointment went better than Sarah had dared to hope. Dr. Martinez, a kind woman in her 50s who worked at a clinic that served the uninsured, examined Sarah thoroughly and declared both mother and baby to be in surprisingly good health, considering the circumstances. "The baby's heartbeat is strong," she told them. The ultrasound wand moving across Sarah's belly. "Due date looks to be about 2 weeks away. You'll need to gain some weight back, but with proper nutrition. There's no reason to expect complications." Jake sat in the corner of the examination room, his presence incongruous among the pastel walls and educational posters about prenatal vitamins. But he listened intently to every word Dr. Martinez said, asking questions about Sarah's diet and what signs to watch for as the delivery approached. Afterward, they stopped at the grocery store. Sarah watched in amazement as Jake filled the cart with fresh fruits and vegetables, whole grain bread, milk, lean proteins, foods she had not been able to afford in months. "You don't have to do all this," she said, as he loaded bags into the back of Murphy's old pickup truck. "Yeah, I do," he said, not looking at her, back at the garage. Sarah offered to help Murphy with the paperwork while Jake worked on cars. The old Irishman was delighted to have someone who could organize his chaotic filing system and answer the phone with more charm than Jake's gruff monosyllables. "That one's been different since you showed up," Murphy told her, nodding toward Jake, who was bent over the engine of a Ford pickup. "Less angry, you know? Like he's got something to care about besides just getting through the day." Sarah watched Jake work, noting the careful precision of his movements. The way he handled tools like extensions of his own hands. When a difficult bolt refused to budge, he did not curse or throw things like Marcus would have. He simply tried a different approach, patient and methodical. Around lunchtime, Jake's wallet fell out of his pocket when he reached for a wrench. Sarah bent to pick it up, and as she handed it back, a photograph slipped out onto the floor. Before Jake could stop her, she saw it, a much younger version of him in military fatigues, standing beside a small, dark-haired woman who looked just like him, and an older woman with kind eyes who had to be their mother. "Is that your sister?" Sarah asked softly. Jake took the photo and tucked it back into his wallet without looking at it. "Yeah, that's Maria and our mom. They looked like they loved you very much." Something flickered across Jake's face. Vulnerability he quickly covered. "Maria was 19 when she died. My mom passed 2 years later. Heart attack, but I think it was really from losing Maria." Sarah understood then why he carried their picture, why he had brought her inside that night, why he was taking such careful care of her. He was trying to save the family he had lost, one pregnant woman at a time. "You're a good man." "Jake Morrison," she said. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw something in his eyes she had not expected. Hope. Fragile and tentative, but real. "Don't be so sure about that," he said. But his voice lacked conviction. That evening, as Sarah helped Murphy close up the garage and Jake finished the last repair of the day, she felt something she had not experienced in months. She felt like she belonged somewhere, like she was part of something larger than her own survival. It was a dangerous feeling, she knew. Nothing in her recent experience suggested that good things lasted. But as she watched Jake carefully wash the grease from his hands and Murphy count the day's receipts, she allowed herself to imagine that maybe this time might be different. 2 weeks passed in a rhythm that felt almost normal. Sarah's strength returned with proper food and rest, and she found herself genuinely useful around the garage. She organized Murphy's chaotic office, scheduled appointments, and even learned to order parts from suppliers who seemed charmed by her voice on the phone. Jake watched her carefully, noting how she moved with more confidence each day, how color returned to her cheeks, how the baby seemed to settle into a pattern of active mornings and quiet afternoons. He found himself looking forward to their conversations over dinner, the way she laughed at Murphy's terrible jokes, the questions she asked about the cars he was working on. One evening, as Sarah sat at the kitchen table sorting invoices, Jake emerged from his bedroom carrying something wrapped in tissue paper. He set it on the table in front of her without saying anything. "What's this?" she asked. "Open it." Sarah carefully unwrapped the tissue to reveal a baby blanket, hand-knitted in soft yellow yarn, with intricate patterns of flowers and vines along the edges. It was old but beautifully preserved, the kind of thing that spoke of hours of loving work. "Jake, this is beautiful." "Where did you get it?" "My mom made it," he said quietly. "For Maria's baby. I found it in her things after she died." Sarah's hands trembled as she held the blanket. She understood the magnitude of what he was giving her. This was not just a baby blanket. This was the last connection to the family he had lost, the symbol of hopes and dreams that had died with his sister. "I can't take this," she said. "It's too precious." "It's meant for a baby," Jake said. "Maria would want it used." That night, Sarah felt the baby kick harder than usual, as if responding to the blanket folded carefully on the chair beside her bed. She placed her hand on her belly and whispered to her daughter about the man who was giving them both a chance at life, about the family they were creating in the most unlikely circumstances. When Jake knocked softly on her door, she called for him to come in. He stood in the doorway uncertain. "Can I feel?" he asked, nodding toward her belly. Sarah nodded and took his hand, placing it where the baby was most active. When his daughter kicked against his palm, Jake's face transformed with wonder. "She's strong," he said. "She'll need to be," Sarah replied. They sat in comfortable silence, Jake's hand still resting on her belly, both of them marveling at the miracle of new life. In that moment, they were no longer a desperate woman and a dangerous man who had found each other by chance. They were a family, chosen and claimed by circumstance and love. Sarah was arranging parts catalogues in Murphy's office when she heard the voices outside. Sharp, angry, familiar. Her blood turned to ice as she recognized Marcus's voice cutting through the sounds of the garage. "I know she's here," Marcus was saying. "My wife, Sarah Coleman? Someone saw her with that biker freak." Through the office window, Sarah could see 3 men standing near the garage bay doors. Marcus looked exactly as she remembered. Tall, lean, expensively dressed even in jeans and a winter coat. His 2 companions were unfamiliar, but their posture suggested they were there for more than moral support. Jake emerged from under the hood of a Buick, wiping his hands on a shop rag. He moved with deliberate calm, but Sarah could see the change in his body language. The easy confidence was replaced by something harder, more dangerous. "You gentlemen need something?" Jake asked, his voice level. "I need my wife back," Marcus said, his tone carrying the arrogance Sarah remembered so well. "And my unborn child." "Don't see any wives around here," Jake replied. "Just Sarah, and she's not going anywhere she doesn't want to go." Marcus's face flushed red. "You don't understand who you're dealing with. I'm an attorney. I have connections. I can make your life very difficult." Jake stepped closer, and Sarah saw his right hand drift toward his pocket. She knew instinctively that whatever he kept there was not something Marcus wanted to see. "And you don't understand who you're dealing with," Jake said quietly. "Sarah told me all about you, how you threw her out when she needed you most, how you told her you never wanted to be a father. That's between me and my wife, ex-wife," Sarah said, stepping out of the office. All four men turned to look at her. "I filed the papers last week." Marcus's expression shifted from anger to something uglier. "Look at you," he said with disgust. "Living with some criminal, probably doing God knows what for money. This is what you've become?" Jake's hand closed around the brass knuckles in his pocket, feeling their familiar weight. Violence had been his answer to problems for so long that reaching for it felt like breathing. But Sarah was watching him, and he could see the fear in her eyes. Not fear of Marcus, but fear of what Jake might do. "I've become someone who doesn't need you," Sarah said, her voice stronger than Jake had ever heard it. "Someone who's building a real life with people who actually care about me." "With him?" Marcus laughed harshly. "Do you have any idea what he is? What he's done?" "I did my research, Sarah. Jake Morrison, discharged from the army under questionable circumstances. Arrested twice for assault. Member of a motorcycle gang that deals drugs and commits murder for money." Jake felt the brass knuckles grow warm in his grip. Every word Marcus spoke was designed to hurt, to separate him from Sarah, to remind them both that he was not the kind of man who deserved a family. "You're right," Jake said quietly. "I've done things I'm not proud of, but I never abandoned a pregnant woman. I never threw someone I was supposed to love out into the street." Marcus stepped forward, his companions flanking him. "You think you can just steal someone's family? Think again. I'm filing for emergency custody. I'll have social services here tomorrow. They'll take one look at this situation and remove my child from this dangerous environment." "Your child?" Sarah's voice was dangerous now. "You said you never wanted this baby. You said you never signed up to be a father. I changed my mind." "Sue me." Jake knew what this was really about. Marcus did not want Sarah or the baby. He wanted to win. He wanted to prove he could take back what he had thrown away, that his power and connections could overcome any obstacle. "Get out," Jake said, his voice carrying a threat that made Marcus's companions step back involuntarily. "Or what? You'll assault me? Please do. It'll make the custody hearing so much easier." Jake released the brass knuckles and stepped back. This was exactly what Marcus wanted. One act of violence, one moment of losing control, and Sarah would lose everything. "Just leave," Sarah said tiredly. "Please, Marcus, just leave us alone." Marcus smiled, sensing victory. "I'll be back, Sarah, with a court order and social services. Enjoy your last few days playing house with your biker boyfriend." As the three men walked away, Jake felt something he had not experienced in years. The sick knowledge that violence was not the answer, and that the people he cared about were in danger he could not punch his way out of. The envelope arrived 3 days later, delivered by a courier who waited while Murphy signed for it with shaking hands. Sarah knew what it was before she opened it. The legal papers were thick, official, stamped with court seals that carried the weight of the state behind them. "Emergency petition for custody and child welfare investigation," she read aloud, her voice hollow. "Marcus Coleman versus Sarah Coleman, regarding the welfare of minor child, baby girl Coleman." Jake read over her shoulder, his jaw tightening with each paragraph. The petition painted a picture of Sarah as an unfit mother who had abandoned her marital home to live with a dangerous criminal. It described Jake as a violent gang member with a history of assault and drug-related activities. It demanded immediate intervention by Child Protective Services and temporary custody be awarded to Marcus Coleman pending a full investigation. "This is all lies," Sarah said. But even as she spoke, she could see how the truth had been twisted into something ugly and damaging. Yes, she was living with Jake. Yes, he was a Hells Angels member. Yes, he had been arrested before. In a courtroom, those facts would carry more weight than the reality of their situation. The phone rang, and Murphy answered with his usual gruff hello. His face grew grave as he listened. "That was my friend at CPS," he said after hanging up. "They're sending someone over this afternoon. Surprise inspection." Jake stood and paced to the window, his hands clenched into fists. Everything in his training told him to run, to get on his bike and disappear before the authorities arrived. But that would mean abandoning Sarah, and he knew he could not do that. "Maybe I should leave," he said without turning around. "Take myself out of the equation. It's me they have a problem with." "No," Sarah said firmly. We're in this together. The caseworker arrived at 2 o'clock sharp. Janet Morrison was a tired-looking woman in her 40s who had clearly seen too much in her years with the department. She carried a clipboard and wore the expression of someone who expected the worst and was rarely disappointed. Sarah led her through the apartment, showing her the bedroom where she slept, the kitchen where she ate healthy meals, the bathroom where she could maintain proper hygiene. Everything was clean, organized, safe. The baby blanket Jake had given her was folded carefully on a chair, evidence of the care being taken for the child's arrival. "Mr. Morrison," Janet said, turning to Jake, "I need to ask you some questions." They sat around the small kitchen table, and Janet consulted her notes. "You have a criminal record." "Yes," Jake said simply. "Assault charges twice, bar fights. 7 years ago. I paid my fines and did my community service." "You're a member of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club." "Yes. Are you involved in any illegal activities?" Jake met her eyes steadily. "No, I work as a mechanic. I pay my taxes. I follow the law." Janet made notes, her pen scratching across the paper. "Ms. Coleman, how long have you been living here?" 3 weeks. "And your relationship with Mr. Morrison?" Sarah hesitated. What were they exactly? They had never defined it, never discussed what they meant to each other beyond the obvious care and protection Jake provided. "He saved my life," Sarah said finally. "I was homeless, starving, pregnant. He took me in and has cared for me ever since." "Are you romantically involved?" "We're family," Sarah said, the words surprising her with their truth. "Maybe not in the traditional way, but we're family." Janet spent another hour going through their daily routines, examining the medical records Dr. Martinez had provided, checking the refrigerator and cupboards, noting the baby supplies Jake had purchased. She interviewed Murphy, who spoke passionately about Jake's character and work ethic. When she left, she promised her report would be submitted within 48 hours. "What do you think?" Sarah asked after the caseworker had gone. Jake shook his head. "I think we're fighting an uphill battle. On paper, Marcus looks like the better choice. Stable job, clean record, legal husband, ex-husband," Sarah corrected. "Courts don't always see it that way, especially when there's a baby involved." That night Sarah could not sleep. She lay in bed with Jake's mother's blanket pressed against her chest, feeling her daughter move restlessly inside her. Tomorrow, a stranger would decide whether she was fit to be a mother, whether the man who had saved her life was too dangerous to be trusted with a child's welfare. The legal documents sat on the kitchen table like a bomb waiting to explode, threatening to destroy the only family she had ever really known. Murphy O'Malley had lived in the neighborhood for 43 years, and he knew everyone worth knowing. When he put out the word that Jake Morrison needed character references, the response surprised even him. Mrs. Chen from the corner market was the first to arrive at the garage, carrying a handwritten letter in her careful English. "Jake fixed my delivery truck many times," she told Sarah. "Never charged too much. Always honest. Good man." By the end of the week, Murphy's desk was covered with letters. Tony Ricci from the pizza place wrote about how Jake had helped him install a new engine in his delivery van, refusing payment and working late into the night. Father McKenna from St. Bridget's described how Jake had quietly repaired the church van that carried elderly parishioners to services, asking only that Father McKenna not mention it to anyone. "I had no idea," Sarah said, reading through the letters. "You never told me about any of this," Jake shrugged, uncomfortable with the attention. "Wasn't worth mentioning. People need help sometimes." The letter that meant the most came from Rosa Martinez, who ran the homeless shelter downtown. Her English was halting, but her message was clear. Jake had been quietly donating money to the shelter for 3 years, enough to feed a dozen people each month. He'd also volunteered his mechanical skills, keeping their old van running when they could not afford repairs. "He never give his name," Rosa had written. "Just leave money in envelope, fix what is broken, go away. But I see his motorcycle. I know it's him." Dr. Martinez provided medical documentation showing Sarah's excellent health and the baby's normal development. She wrote a detailed letter explaining how Jake's care had likely saved both their lives, how his attention to Sarah's nutrition and medical needs demonstrated a level of responsibility that many biological fathers never achieved. The most surprising support came from an unexpected source. Detective Ray Murphy, no relation to garage owner Murphy, had arrested Jake 7 years earlier during one of those bar fights. His letter was brief but powerful. Jake Morrison took responsibility for his actions, paid his debt to society, and has stayed out of trouble since. In my experience, that puts him ahead of 90% of the men who come through my precinct. If he's taken on the responsibility of caring for a pregnant woman, I believe he will see it through. Even some of Jake's Hell's Angels brothers contributed, though their letters required careful editing. Big Mike wrote about Jake's loyalty and integrity within the club, his refusal to participate in illegal activities, his reputation as someone who could be trusted completely. Chains described how Jake had talked him out of a revenge beating that would have landed them both in prison, showing wisdom and maturity that had saved lives. The hardest letter to read came from James Wheeler, who had served under Jake in Afghanistan. His account of Jake's heroism during an ambush that had saved 8 soldiers brought tears to Sarah's eyes. Sergeant Morrison was the kind of leader who brought his men home, Wheeler wrote. If he has committed to protecting this woman and her child, they are safer than they would be with a team of bodyguards. Sarah's own contribution was a detailed account of the past month, describing Jake's gentle care during her recovery, his patience in teaching her about car maintenance, his excitement when feeling the baby kick. She wrote about finding him reading parenting books he had bought in secret, about how he had baby-proofed the apartment without being asked, about the way he talked to her unborn daughter each night. Murphy gathered all the letters into a thick folder and delivered them personally to Janet Morrison at Child Protective Services. That young man has been part of this community for 8 years, he told her. Maybe he looks different from what you're used to, but character isn't about appearance. It's about actions, and Jake's actions speak for themselves. 2 days later, Janet called with the preliminary findings. Sarah's living situation was deemed stable and appropriate. Jake's background check, while noting his criminal record, also documented his steady employment, community ties, and the overwhelmingly positive character references. Most importantly, Dr. Martinez's medical reports showed clear evidence of excellent prenatal care. The department sees no immediate threat to the welfare of the unborn child, Janet told them over the phone. However, Mr. Coleman's petition will still go before a judge. This isn't over. Jake hung up the phone and looked at Sarah, something like hope flickering in his eyes for the first time since Marcus had appeared. Maybe, just maybe, they had a fighting chance. Dr. Martinez moved the ultrasound wand across Sarah's belly with practiced ease, pausing occasionally to take measurements and check angles. The monitor showed a grainy black and white image that gradually resolved into the unmistakable profile of a baby girl. "There's her face," Dr. Martinez said, pointing to the screen. "And look, she's sucking her thumb." Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes as she watched her daughter's tiny movements. The baby was real, fully formed, ready to enter the world in just days. But it was Jake's reaction that took her breath away. He stood frozen beside the examination table, his scarred hands gripped tight at his sides, staring at the screen with an expression of pure wonder. When the baby shifted, and they could see her tiny hand opening and closing, Jake made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "She's perfect," he whispered. Dr. Martinez printed several copies of the ultrasound photo, handing one to Sarah and offering another to Jake. He took it with hands that trembled slightly, holding it like it was made of spun glass. In the truck afterward, Jake studied the photo while Sarah buckled her seatbelt. The black and white image showed their daughter's profile, her nose, her lips, the curve of her forehead. "I want to be there," Jake said suddenly. "When she's born, I want to be in the room." Sarah looked at him, seeing the vulnerability he was trying so hard to hide. "Are you sure?" It's going to be messy and scary, and I've seen worse, Jake said, but his voice was gentle. I want to be the first person she sees. I want her to know from the very beginning that she's safe. That evening, Jake sat at the kitchen table with the ultrasound photo propped against the salt shaker, reading one of the parenting books he had bought. Sarah watched him from the doorway, noting how he took careful notes in the margins, how he flagged pages about newborn care and infant development. What if I'm not good enough? He asked without looking up from the book. Sarah sat down across from him. Good enough for what? For her, for you. What if I can't protect her the way she needs to be protected? What if my past catches up with us? What if the other kids at school are afraid of her because of who I am? Sarah reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. Do you remember what you told me the night you found me in that alley? Jake shook his head. You said, because you need help. That's who you are. Jake, you're the person who helps when others won't. You're the person who gives strangers a place to sleep and makes sure pregnant women eat enough vegetables and reads parenting books at midnight because you want to do everything right. But what if it's not enough? What if Marcus is right? What if she would be better off with someone who doesn't have my history? Sarah felt her own fears rising to match his. She had been pushing them down for weeks, focusing on the day-to-day reality of building a life with Jake. But they were there. What if the court decided she was an unfit mother? What if they took her daughter away? What if loving Jake meant losing everything? I don't know, she admitted. I'm scared too. Scared that I'm not strong enough to be a good mother. Scared that I'm asking too much of you. Scared that Marcus will find a way to take her from us. Jake stood and walked to the window, looking out at the darkening street. My father left when I was 12, he said. Just walked out one day and never came back. My mom worked 3 jobs trying to keep us together, but it was never enough. Maria and I basically raised ourselves. He turned back to Sarah. I swore I would never be like him, never abandon someone who needed me. But what if I don't know how to be anything else? What if I'm just fooling myself thinking I can be a father? Sarah struggled to her feet and went to him, placing her hands on his chest where she could feel his heart beating fast with anxiety. You already are a father, she said firmly. You've been taking care of us for a month. You baby-proofed the apartment. You bought a car seat. You talk to her every night. Biology doesn't make someone a father, Jake. Choice does. And you've already chosen us. Jake looked down at the ultrasound photo in his hand, at the tiny face that would soon be looking back at him, depending on him for everything. I choose you too, he said quietly. Both of you. Whatever happens, I choose you. The first threatening letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, slipped under the garage door sometime during the night. Murphy found it when he opened up. A plain white envelope with no return address and Sarah's name written in block letters. You don't belong here, it read. Leave now or face the consequences. Jake examined the paper, noting the cheap stationery, the careful anonymity of the printed letters. Marcus, he said with certainty. You can't prove that, Sarah said, but her hands shook as she held the letter. Don't need to prove it. I know. More letters followed over the next week. Some were addressed to Sarah, others to Jake, all carrying the same message. They were not wanted, they were being watched, they should leave before something bad happened. The letters escalated from vague threats to specific warnings about Sarah's job at the diner, about Jake's reputation in the neighborhood, about what would happen to their baby if they did not comply. Rosa at the diner pulled Sarah aside on Thursday afternoon. Someone's been calling, she said nervously. Anonymous complaints about you, saying you're unstable, that you might be on drugs, that customers are uncomfortable with you here. That's ridiculous, Sarah said. You know I'm not on anything. Dr. Martinez tests me regularly. I know that, and you know that, but corporate doesn't know that. They're sending someone down from head office to investigate. I'm sorry, Sarah. I tried to fight it, but my hands are tied. Sarah walked home from the diner that afternoon, feeling the weight of Marcus's campaign pressing down on her. He was methodically destroying everything they had built, using his legal connections and resources to make their life impossible. The worst part was that it was working. Doubt crept in with each letter, each phone call, each complaint. Maybe she was being selfish. Maybe her daughter would be better off with Marcus after all. Jake was waiting for her at the garage, and one look at her face told him what had happened. "They're going to fire me," she said simply. Jake's jaw tightened, and Sarah could see him fighting the urge to solve this problem the way he had solved problems in his old life. Violence would feel good in the moment, she knew, but it would also hand Marcus exactly what he needed to win. "We'll figure something else out," Jake said. "Murphy can use more help here. We don't need the diner." But they both knew it was more than just the job. It was the systematic erosion of their credibility, their standing in the community, their ability to provide a stable home for a child. Marcus was playing a long game, and he had resources they could not match. That evening, 3 of Jake's Hells Angels brothers showed up at the garage. Big Mike, Chains, and Axel stood in the bay looking uncomfortable in the civilian setting, their leather jackets and patches incongruous among the oil changes and tire repairs. "We heard you got trouble," Big Mike said without preamble. Jake nodded. "Nothing I can't handle." "Maybe you can't handle it the right way," Chains said meaningfully. "Maybe it needs handling the old way." Sarah felt ice form in her stomach. She knew what they were offering. Make Marcus disappear, end the threats permanently. It would be easy for them, and Marcus would simply become another missing person case that never got solved. "No," Jake said firmly. "That's not how we're doing this. This is about family," Axel said. "About protecting what's yours. Since when do we let some rich lawyer push us around?" "Since I decided I wanted to be someone my daughter could be proud of," Jake replied. The 3 men exchanged looks. This was not the Jake Morrison they knew, the Reaper who had earned his patch through violence and intimidation. This was someone softer, more careful, more concerned with consequences than with immediate satisfaction. "Your choice," Big Mike said finally. "But the offer stands. One word from you, and this problem goes away." After they left, Sarah and Jake sat in the kitchen reading the day's threatening letter. The paper felt toxic in Sarah's hands, contaminated with hate and malice. "Are you having second thoughts?" Jake asked quietly. "About us? About staying?" Sarah looked at him, this man who had sacrificed so much for her and her unborn child, who was choosing the hard path when the easy one was right there waiting. "Never," she said. "We're going to beat him, Jake. We're going to beat him the right way." But as she said it, Sarah wondered if being right was enough when Marcus held all the cards. The Hells Angels clubhouse sat on the outskirts of town, a converted warehouse surrounded by motorcycles and the kind of men who made ordinary citizens cross the street. Jake had not been there in over a month, not since he had started caring for Sarah, and walking through the doors felt like stepping back into a life he was no longer sure he belonged to. "Look what the cat dragged in," called out Demon, the club president from behind the bar. "Thought maybe you'd forgotten where you came from." Jake touched the patch on his jacket, the 3-piece colors that had defined his identity for 8 years. The Hells Angels patch represented more than membership in a motorcycle club. It was Brotherhood, loyalty, a code of honor that had guided him through the darkest periods of his life. But now it felt heavy, like armor that no longer fit properly. "Been busy," Jake said, taking the beer Demon offered him. "So we heard. Playing house with some pregnant girl." "That's not like you, Reaper." The other club members had gathered around now, a dozen men whose loyalty to each other had been tested in ways that civilian friendships never were. These were the men who had accepted him when the rest of society had written him off, who had given him purpose when he had been drowning in post-war nightmares. "She needed help," Jake said simply. "And now, ask Torch, the club's sergeant-at-arms. Now she's got you washing dishes and changing diapers. That what you want to be, a suburban dad?" Jake felt the familiar pull of their approval, the need to belong somewhere that had driven him to this clubhouse in the first place. But something had changed in him over the past month. The man who had joined the Hells Angels seeking brotherhood and purpose had found something different with Sarah and her unborn child. "What I want is to take care of my family," Jake said. "Your family?" Demon's voice carried a warning. Your family is sitting right here. We're the ones who had your back when you came home from Afghanistan with nothing. We're the ones who gave you a place to belong when the whole world treated you like damaged goods. Jake knew the speech was true. When he had returned from 3 tours of duty with a head full of memories he could not share and skills that had no civilian application, the Hells Angels had been the only organization that valued what he could offer. They had not cared about his nightmares or his difficulty holding down regular jobs. They had seen a warrior and welcomed him home. I'm not forgetting that, Jake said. But things change. Things change, Chains repeated mockingly. You sound like some love-struck teenager. What happens when she gets tired of playing with the dangerous biker? What happens when she decides her kid deserves better than a felon for a father? The words hit harder than Jake wanted to admit because they echoed his own fears. What if Sarah was just grateful now, caught up in the drama of their situation? What if, once the baby was born and life settled into routine, she realized what she had tied herself to? That's her choice to make, Jake said. And what about your choices? Demon asked. You took an oath when you earned those colors. You promised loyalty to this club above everything else. You sure you want to throw that away for some woman you've known for a month? Jake looked around at the faces of men who had been closer than brothers, who had shared dangers and victories and losses that bound them together in ways outsiders could never understand. The Hells Angels patch on his jacket was not just fabric and thread. It was proof that he belonged somewhere, that he was valued, that he was part of something larger than himself. But when he thought about Sarah reading parenting books and organizing Murphy's chaotic office, when he remembered feeling his daughter kick against his palm, he knew his answer. I'm not throwing anything away, Jake said. I'm choosing to build something new. Demon studied him for a long moment. You know what this means? You choose her over us. You're choosing to walk away from the only family you've ever really had. No, Jake said firmly. I'm choosing to make the family I always wanted. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of severed bonds and changed loyalties. Jake finished his beer, set the bottle on the bar, and walked toward the door. Reaper, Demon called after him. You change your mind, you know where to find us. But if you walk out that door now, don't expect to just walk back in later. Jake paused at the threshold, his hand on the door handle. The Hells Angels patch burning like a brand on his back. The knock on the apartment door came at 8 in the morning, sharp and official. Sarah was making breakfast while Jake read the newspaper, both of them settling into the domestic routine that had become their normal life. But there was nothing normal about the woman standing in their doorway with a clipboard and a stern expression. I'm Janet Morrison from Child Protective Services, she announced. This is a surprise inspection to assess the living conditions and welfare preparations for the minor child. Sarah's heart sank. They had known this was coming, but the reality of it felt like a punch to the stomach. Everything they had built over the past month would be judged in the next hour by someone who saw only statistics and risk factors. Of course, Sarah said, stepping aside to let her in. Please come in. Janet moved through the apartment with professional efficiency, taking notes on everything. She opened the refrigerator and noted the healthy food, checked the locks on the windows, examined the smoke detectors Jake had installed. In the bedroom that would serve as the nursery, she catalogued the crib Murphy had built, the changing table Jake had assembled, the clothes and supplies they had gathered. Mr. Morrison, Janet said, consulting her notes, I need to discuss your background with you. Jake sat across from her at the kitchen table, his military medals and commendations spread out before him. Purple Heart for wounds received in combat. Bronze Star for valor in the face of enemy fire. Good Conduct Medal for exemplary service. Combat Action Badge for engagement with hostile forces. You served 3 tours in Afghanistan, Janet said, reading from his military records. Yes, ma'am. 8th year with Special Forces. Honorable discharge in 2015, and after your discharge? I had some trouble adjusting, Jake admitted. Got into a couple of fights, spent some time figuring out who I was supposed to be as a civilian, but I've been clean for 7 years. Steady job, steady address, no arrests since 2017. Janet picked up the Bronze Star, examining it closely. This citation says you saved 8 soldiers during an ambush. Led them to safety under heavy fire. I did my job, Jake said simply. Your job was to bring people home safely, to protect those under your care. Janet set the medal down carefully. Is that what you're doing now? Jake met her eyes steadily. Yes, ma'am. That's exactly what I'm doing. Janet spent another hour going through their daily routines, examining Sarah's medical records, checking the baby supplies. She interviewed Murphy, who spoke passionately about Jake's character and dedication. She called Dr. Martinez, who provided detailed information about Sarah's excellent health and the quality of prenatal care she had received. Ms. Coleman, Janet said finally, I need you to be honest with me. Are you afraid of Mr. Morrison? Has he ever threatened you or made you feel unsafe? Sarah looked at Jake, this man who had saved her life and asked for nothing in return, who read parenting books and baby-proofed their apartment and talked to her unborn daughter every night. The only time I've ever felt unsafe around Jake was when I thought he might leave, Sarah said. He's the gentlest man I've ever known. He's the best father my daughter could ask for. Janet made a final note and closed her file. Mr. Morrison, your military record speaks to your character under pressure. The community support you've both received is unprecedented in my experience. Dr. Martinez's medical reports show excellent prenatal care. The living conditions here are clean, safe, and appropriate for a newborn. Sarah held her breath. Afraid to hope, however, Janet continued. Mr. Coleman's petition raises legitimate concerns about stability and long-term planning. This case will ultimately be decided by a judge who will weigh all these factors. She stood and gathered her papers. For what it's worth, I've seen a lot of bad situations in my career. This isn't one of them. Whatever brought you two together, you've created something good here. After Janet left, Sarah collapsed into Jake's arms, overwhelmed by relief and lingering fear. They had passed this test, but bigger challenges lay ahead. Jake held her close, his own emotions churning. The medals on the table reminded him of who he had been, what he had accomplished when everything was on the line. He had brought soldiers home from Afghanistan under impossible circumstances. Surely he could bring his own family safely through this legal battle. We're going to make it, he whispered into Sarah's hair. We're going to win this. But even as he said it, Jake knew that some battles could not be won through courage and determination alone. Some enemies could not be defeated with honor and strength. Some wars were fought in courtrooms with weapons he did not know how to use. Murphy emerged from his workshop, wiping sawdust from his hands, his face glowing with the satisfaction of work well done. Behind him, covered with an old sheet, sat something that had consumed his evenings for the past 3 weeks. Sarah, Jake, he called. Come here. I've got something for you. Sarah waddled over, her belly now so large that she had to turn sideways to fit through the workshop door. Jake followed, curious about what the old Irishman had been hiding in his sacred workspace, where even Murphy's own wife had been forbidden to enter. Now, I know you two have been collecting baby things, Murphy said, his voice uncharacteristically formal. But every child needs something special, something made with love. He pulled away the sheet with a flourish, revealing a hand-carved wooden crib that took Sarah's breath away. The wood was honey-colored oak, sanded smooth as silk, with intricate Celtic knots carved into the headboard and delicate shamrocks decorating the sides. Every joint was perfect, every detail lovingly crafted. Murphy, Sarah breathed, tears springing to her eyes. It's beautiful. Took me 26 years to make this, Murphy said gruffly. Started it when my Margaret and I were trying for children of our own. Never had any, as you know. Been sitting in pieces all this time, waiting for the right baby. Jake ran his hands over the smooth wood, marveling at the craftsmanship. This was not just furniture. This was a masterpiece, a labor of love that represented decades of hope and patience. We can't accept this, Jake said quietly. It's too much. You can and you will, Murphy said firmly. That little girl is going to need to know she's wanted, that she belongs somewhere. This crib says she's part of this family, part of this community. No court in the world can argue with that. Word of Murphy's gift spread quickly through the neighborhood, and by evening, the garage was filled with women carrying casseroles, baby clothes and homemade blankets. Rosa from the diner brought a high chair her own children had outgrown. Mrs. Chen contributed a bassinet and enough baby formula to last 6 months. Even Father McKenna stopped by with a blessing and a promise to baptize the baby whenever they were ready. "I've never seen anything like this," said Mrs. Patterson, who had lived on the block for 30 years. "You two have brought this neighborhood together in a way I haven't seen since the old days." Sarah watched in amazement as her kitchen filled with food and her living room overflowed with baby supplies. These were people who had been strangers a month ago, and now they were treating her and Jake like family. "Why are you all doing this?" she asked Rosa, who was arranging receiving blankets in the new crib. "Because you belong here now," Rosa said simply. "Because Jake belongs here, and because that baby is going to be one of ours." Jake stood in the corner, overwhelmed by the generosity surrounding them. His entire adult life had been spent on the margins of society, part of groups that existed in opposition to mainstream values. The Hells Angels had given him brotherhood, but it was brotherhood born of shared rejection by the world outside. This was different. This was acceptance, inclusion, the kind of belonging he had never imagined possible. Mrs. Chen approached him with a small wrapped package. "For you," she said in her careful English. "From my grandmother in China. She say it bring good luck to new father." Inside was a small jade pendant carved in the shape of a dragon, worn smooth by generations of handling. She say dragon protect family, bring strength when needed most. As the evening wound down and the neighbors began to leave, Sarah found herself surrounded by enough baby supplies to stock a small store. But more than the material gifts, she felt the weight of community support. The sense that she and Jake and their daughter were no longer alone in the world. Murphy was the last to leave. In pausing at the door to look back at the crib he had finally finished. "Your little girl is going to sleep safe in that bed," he said. "And she's going to know that she's loved by more people than she can count." After everyone had gone, Sarah and Jake sat beside the crib, marveling at its beauty and the love it represented. The hand-carved Celtic knots seemed to tell a story of connection and continuity, of traditions passed down and hopes fulfilled. "We're really going to make it, aren't we?" Sarah said, her hand resting on her belly. Jake touched one of the carved shamrocks, thinking about belonging and community and the family they were building together. "Yeah," he said, "we really are." Sarah was organizing Jake's military documents for the upcoming court hearing when she noticed something that made her freeze. Among the commendations and discharge papers was a unit roster from his time in Afghanistan. And there, halfway down the list of soldiers under his command, was a name that stopped her heart. Staff Sergeant Thomas Mitchell, her father. "Jake," she called, her voice shaking. "Jake, come here now." He emerged from the kitchen, dish towel in hand, and saw her pale face. "What's wrong?" "This roster, from your unit in Afghanistan." "Thomas Mitchell, that's my father." Jake went still, the dish towel falling from his hands. He'd known something felt familiar about Sarah from the beginning, something about her eyes, her stubborn chin, the way she carried herself even when she was broken down. Now it all made sense. "Tom Mitchell was your dad." Jake's voice was barely a whisper. "You knew him." Jake sat down heavily in the chair across from her, his hands trembling as he took the roster. "He was my friend. My best friend over there. He saved my life." Sarah stared at him, trying to process what this meant. All this time, all these weeks of building something together, and they had been connected long before they ever met. "Tell me," she said simply. Jake closed his eyes, and for a moment he was back in the mountains of Afghanistan, 28 years old, and carrying the weight of 12 soldiers' lives on his shoulders. "It was our second tour," he began. "June 2014. We were running a reconnaissance mission in the Korangal Valley when we walked into an ambush. Taliban fighters had us pinned down in a canyon with no way out. We were taking heavy fire from 3 sides. Sarah listened, her heart pounding, as Jake described the firefight that had claimed 6 American lives and nearly ended his own. I took shrapnel in my leg and couldn't move. The rest of the squad was scattered, some wounded, all of us cut off from each other. Your dad was the only one who could have made it out clean. He was behind good cover, had a clear route to safety. Jake's voice broke slightly. But he came for me instead. Crawled through 50 yards of open ground under machine gun fire to reach me. Got me behind cover, patched me up, then laid down covering fire while I called in air support. What happened? Sniper got him while he was protecting me. Single shot to the head. He died instantly. Jake's hands were shaking now. The helicopter came 5 minutes later. 5 minutes! If he had just waited, if he had let me call for help instead of trying to save me himself, he would have made it home. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. This was how her father had died, not in some faceless random act of war, but saving the life of the man who was now saving her. He talked about you all the time, Jake continued. Had pictures of you in his wallet. You were in college then, studying to be a teacher. He was so proud of you. Said you were the strongest person he knew, that you could handle anything life threw at you. He never told me about you. He wrote letters, Jake said. I saw him writing them almost every night. He said he wanted to tell you about the good things over there, the friendships, the men who had each other's backs. He said he didn't want you to worry about him being alone. Sarah thought about those letters, the ones that had arrived sporadically throughout her father's deployment. He had written about the beautiful mountains, the courage of his fellow soldiers, the bond between men who depended on each other for survival. He had never mentioned the danger, never described the fear, never told her how close he came to not making it home. There's something else, Jake said quietly. He went to his bedroom and returned with a small metal box. Inside were his father's dog tags, a bronze star, and a letter addressed to Sarah Mitchell in her father's familiar handwriting. He gave this to me the day before he died, Jake said. Made me promise that if anything happened to him, I would find you and give it to you personally. I've been carrying it for 10 years, never knowing how to find you, never having the courage to look. Sarah took the letter with trembling hands. Her name was written in her father's careful script, the envelope sealed and yellowed with age. This is why, she whispered, understanding flooding through her. This is why you helped me that night. You've been looking for me. I didn't know it was you, Jake said. But maybe some part of me recognized something. Maybe Tom was still looking out for both of us. Sarah held the letter against her chest, feeling the weight of destiny and connection and love that transcended death. Her father had brought them together across time and tragedy, had somehow arranged for his daughter to be saved by the man whose life he had given his own to protect. Marcus Coleman sat in his law office at 2 a.m, surrounded by empty coffee cups and crumpled papers. The custody hearing was scheduled for next week, and everything was falling apart. The character references for Jake were overwhelming. The CPS report was favorable. Even his own private investigator had found nothing actionable in Jake's recent behavior. Desperate times called for desperate measures. Marcus opened his laptop and began typing, creating what would become the most damaging piece of evidence in the custody case. The document purported to be a police report from 3 weeks ago, describing a domestic violence incident at Murphy's garage. According to the fabricated report, Sarah had called 911 after Jake had threatened her during an argument, leaving visible bruises on her arms. He backdated the document, added fake badge numbers and case references, even included a photo he had manipulated to show Sarah with bruises that had never existed. The forged police report looked official, complete with department letterhead and signatures that would fool anyone who did not know where to look. Next came the affidavits. Marcus created statements from 3 fictitious witnesses who claimed to have seen Jake behaving violently toward Sarah, a neighbor who reported hearing screaming from the apartment, a customer at the garage who saw Jake grab Sarah's arm roughly, a doctor who supposedly treated Sarah for injuries she never received. The final piece was a falsified medical record showing that Sarah had been treated at the emergency room for injuries consistent with domestic abuse. Marcus had enough connections in the medical community to know what such a report should look like, how the language should read, what details would make it believable. By dawn, Marcus had constructed an elaborate fiction that painted Jake as a violent predator who had been systematically abusing Sarah. The forged documents would be submitted to the court as evidence of Jake's unfitness as a guardian, proof that Sarah was living in an unsafe environment. But Marcus's desperation went beyond paperwork. He spent the morning visiting Rosa at the diner, offering her $5,000 to testify that she had seen bruises on Sarah's arms, that Sarah had confided in her about Jake's violence. "You're crazy," Rosa told him, backing away from the money he had laid on the counter. "Jake Morrison has never laid a hand on that girl except to help her. And even if he had, I wouldn't lie in court for any amount of money." Marcus tried the same approach with Mrs. Chen at the corner market, with the mechanics who worked near Murphy's garage, even with Father McKenna at the church. Each time he was met with disbelief and disgust. The community that had embraced Jake and Sarah saw through Marcus's lies immediately. "You're the one who threw her out pregnant," Mrs. Chen told him angrily. "You're the one who should be ashamed." By afternoon, word of Marcus's attempted bribery had spread through the neighborhood. Murphy confronted him outside the garage, his Irish temper flaring. "You listen to me, you miserable excuse for a man," Murphy said, his finger pointed at Marcus's chest. "That girl and that baby are under our protection now. You want to fight dirty? Fine, but you'll find that this community has a long memory and no patience for bullies." Marcus retreated to his car, shaken by the hostility he had encountered. These people did not understand what was at stake. They saw a romantic story of redemption and second chances. He saw the reality, a pregnant woman making poor choices with a dangerous man, a child who deserved better than to be raised by criminals and outcasts. That evening, Marcus received a phone call that changed everything. "Mr. Coleman, this is Detective Ray Murphy. I understand you've been asking around about some alleged domestic violence incidents involving Jake Morrison." Marcus's blood ran cold. "I'm just trying to protect my child, Detective. Funny thing is, we have no record of any such incidents, but we do have several reports today of a man matching your description, attempting to bribe witnesses to give false testimony. That's a felony, Mr. Coleman. Perjury, suborning perjury, witness tampering. You could lose your law license. I don't know what you're talking about. Sure you don't. Here's some free legal advice. Whatever you're planning to submit to that court better be legitimate. Because if I find out you've fabricated evidence in a custody case, I'll arrest you myself." The phone went dead, leaving Marcus alone in his office with his forged documents and his growing panic. Everything he had built, his career, his reputation, his future, was at risk. But he had come too far to stop now. He gathered the false evidence into a manila envelope, knowing that submitting it would either win him custody of the child or destroy his life completely. But he could not accept defeat. He could not allow Sarah to choose Jake Morrison over him. He could not let them win. Tomorrow, he would take his fabricated proof to court and gamble everything on one final lie. The courthouse was packed when Sarah and Jake arrived for the final hearing. Murphy had closed the garage for the day so he could be there, and it seemed like half the neighborhood had come to show their support. Rosa sat in the front row with Mrs. Chen and Father McKenna. Even some of Jake's Hell's Angels brothers had shown up, their leather jackets a stark contrast to the formal setting, but their presence unmistakable. Sarah wore the one dress that still fit her, navy. The baby had been unusually active all morning. Jake sat beside her in his only suit, the one he had bought for job interviews years ago, his military medals pinned to his lapel. Judge Patricia Reeves entered the courtroom, a stern woman in her 60s who had been handling family court cases for over 20 years. She had seen every kind of custody dispute, every form of manipulation and deception that desperation could produce. Marcus sat at the plaintiff's table with his attorney, a manila envelope of fabricated evidence beside him. His hands shook slightly as he prepared to submit documents he knew could send him to prison if discovered. But losing this case felt like a greater threat than any legal consequences. "Your Honor," Marcus's attorney began, "we have new evidence that fundamentally changes the nature of this case. Evidence that shows Ms. Coleman and her unborn child are in immediate danger." He handed the forged police report to the judge, describing fictional incidents of domestic violence that had never occurred. Sarah felt her world tilting as she listened to lies presented as truth. Her life twisted into something unrecognizable. Jake's attorney, a public defender named Maria Santos, who had taken their case pro bono, immediately objected. "Your Honor, we have no record of any such police reports. These allegations appear to be completely fabricated." Judge Reeves examined the documents carefully, her experienced eye noting inconsistencies in formatting and language that suggested forgery. "Mr. Coleman, these are serious allegations. Do you have corroborating evidence?" Marcus nodded to his attorney, who called his first witness, Detective Ray Murphy. "Detective Murphy," the attorney began, "did you investigate reports of domestic violence at Murphy's garage involving Jake Morrison?" Detective Murphy looked directly at Marcus before answering. "No, sir. We have no such reports on file. However, we do have multiple reports from yesterday of someone matching Mr. Coleman's description, attempting to bribe witnesses to give false testimony." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Marcus felt his carefully constructed case crumbling around him. "Furthermore," Detective Murphy continued, "our forensics expert examined these alleged police reports this morning. The formatting is incorrect. The case numbers don't exist in our system, and the officer's signatures are forgeries." Judge Reeves's expression grew thunderous. "Mr. Coleman, did you fabricate these documents?" Before Marcus could answer, Sarah stood up, her voice clear and strong. "Your Honor, may I speak?" "Ms. Coleman, you may address the court." Sarah walked to the witness stand, her hand resting protectively on her belly. "Your Honor, 6 weeks ago I was dying in an alley, abandoned and alone. Jake Morrison found me and saved my life. Not just physically, but in every way that matters." She looked directly at Marcus. "The man I married threw me away when I needed him most. He told me he never wanted to be a father, that our child was a mistake. But Jake chose us. Every day he chooses us." Sarah's voice grew stronger. "He reads parenting books at night. He talks to my daughter through my belly. He baby-proofed our apartment before I even asked. He's everything a father should be, everything Marcus never was." The judge listened intently as Sarah described their life together. The community that had embraced them, the love they had built from nothing. "Jake Morrison is the most honorable man I've ever known," Sarah concluded. "And I trust him with my life and my daughter's life completely." Judge Reeves turned to Jake. "Mr. Morrison, do you have anything to add?" Jake stood, his voice quiet but firm. "Your Honor, I've made mistakes in my life. I've been angry, violent, lost. But Sarah and this baby have given me something to fight for, something to be better for. I'm not asking to replace her father. I'm asking for the chance to be the father she deserves." The judge was quiet for a long moment, reviewing the evidence and testimonies. The forged documents sat before her like a toxic reminder of how far desperation could drive someone. "Mr. Coleman," she said finally, "you have committed multiple felonies in this courtroom today. Perjury, document forgery, witness tampering. I'm ordering your immediate arrest." Court officers moved toward Marcus as his attorney frantically tried to distance himself from the fabricated evidence. "As for the custody matter," Judge Reeves continued, "based on the evidence presented, including the extensive community support, medical records showing excellent prenatal care, and the clear commitment demonstrated by Mr. Morrison, I'm granting him legal standing as presumptive father. Miss Coleman retains full custody, and I see no reason to interfere with what appears to be a stable, loving home environment." The courtroom erupted in cheers as Sarah collapsed into Jake's arms, overwhelmed with relief and joy. Murphy wiped tears from his eyes, while Rosa and Mrs. Chen hugged each other. 3 months later, Sarah gave birth to Emma Rose Morrison in the same hospital where Dr. Martinez had first examined her. Jake was at her side, holding her hand through every contraction. His face filled with wonder when their daughter entered the world. Emma had Sarah's dark hair and Jake's determined chin, and when she opened her eyes for the first time, she looked directly at Jake, as if recognizing the voice that had spoken to her every night for months. The wedding ceremony took place in Murphy's garage, officiated by Father McKenna and attended by everyone who had helped them build their unconventional family. Sarah wore a simple white dress, Jake wore his best suit with his military medals, and Emma slept peacefully in the hand-carved crib that served as their altar. As they exchanged rings, simple gold bands that represented new beginnings rather than broken promises, Jake thought about Tom Mitchell and the debt of love that had brought them together. Sarah thought about the journey from that alley to this moment. From desperation to hope to joy, Emma stirred in her crib, and both her parents reached for her simultaneously, their hands touching as they lifted their daughter together. Outside, Jake's Harley sat next to Sarah's practical sedan, symbols of the different worlds they had bridged to create something entirely new. They were a family forged in adversity, strengthened by community, and bound by love that had overcome every obstacle. And in the years to come, when Emma asked about how her parents met, they would tell her about angels who sometimes wore leather jackets and rode motorcycles, and how love could be found in the most unexpected places.